My name is Hannah Reed, and I was 44 years old when I found a family photograph that should not have existed. The strange part wasn't the people in the picture. The strange part was my husband, because he was standing right in the middle of it, smiling, like he belonged there, like he belonged to them, and until that moment I had never even heard their names. It happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in Seattle. I was supposed to be attending a financial conference downtown. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic, just another work trip. At least that's what I thought. The conference ended early. I had a few hours before my flight, so I decided to surprise my husband. Daniel loved surprises, or at least he used to. We had been married for 16 years. No children, no major scandals, no dramatic fights. Just two busy people trying to build a life together, the kind of marriage that looked solid from the outside. And maybe it was. Until that Tuesday, around 3 o'clock, I received a delivery notification on my phone, a package addressed to Daniel. The problem was the delivery address. It wasn't our home. It wasn't his company headquarters. It wasn't any location I recognized. At first, I assumed it was a storage unit or a client office. Daniel owned several small businesses. Strange addresses weren't unusual, but something about this one bothered me. I can't explain why. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the feeling that had been quietly growing inside me for months, the feeling that something wasn't adding up. So I drove there. The address led me to a small office building near the waterfront. Nothing fancy, just 4 floors. Gray brick walls, private businesses, law offices, consultants. The lobby directory listed a company name I didn't recognize. Harbor Community Resources, Suite 402, and beside it, Daniel Reed. My stomach tightened. I stared at the sign. Because Daniel had never mentioned Harbor Community Resources, not once, not in 16 years. I told myself there was a reasonable explanation. There always is, until there isn't. The elevator felt unusually slow. By the time I reached the 4th floor, my pulse had started climbing. Suite 402's door was slightly open. I knocked, no answer. I knocked again, still nothing. The office appeared empty. Desks, computers, filing cabinets, coffee cups, normal office things. Then I noticed something hanging on the far wall, a framed photograph, large enough to catch attention, small enough to be personal. I walked closer and froze, because there was Daniel, standing beside a woman I had never seen before. 2 children stood in front of them, a boy, a girl, everyone smiling, everyone looking happy, like a family, a real family, and underneath the frame was a brass plaque, just 6 words. Family Appreciation Day, 5 years. I stared at it, unable to move, unable to think, because one question suddenly drowned out every other thought in my head. Who were these people? And why was my husband standing in their family picture? For several seconds, I simply stared at the photograph, certain there had to be an explanation. A charity event, a business project, a volunteer program, something, anything, because the alternative made no sense. Daniel wasn't the kind of man who disappeared for days. He wasn't secretive. He wasn't careless. And yet, here he was, in a family photograph, standing exactly where a husband would stand. I stepped closer. The plaque beneath the frame read, Family Appreciation Day, 5 years. 5 years, not 1, not 2, 5. My stomach tightened, because 5 years wasn't an accident. 5 years was history. 5 years was commitment. 5 years was something people built. I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around. A woman stood in the doorway. Mid-50s, professional clothes, office badge. The moment she saw me, her smile appeared, then disappeared immediately. Oh. Just one word. Oh. The kind of oh people say when they suddenly realize something is wrong. I forced a polite smile. Hi. The woman looked from me, to the photograph, then back to me. And suddenly she looked nervous. Very nervous. Can I help you? I pointed at the picture. That's my husband. The room became completely silent. The woman's face went pale, not confused, not surprised. Pale, as if she had just realized a secret wasn't a secret anymore. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered, "You're Hannah?" My heart skipped, because she knew my name. I had never met her before, yet somehow she already knew who I was. Yes. The woman slowly sat down, like her legs suddenly felt weak. Then she rubbed her forehead. "Oh no." My pulse started climbing. "What is it?" She looked genuinely distressed now, the kind of distress people feel when they've accidentally walked into someone else's disaster. "I thought you knew." There it was, the sentence nobody ever wants to hear. "I thought you knew," because those 4 words usually mean everyone knows something except you. I stared at her. "Knew what?" The woman opened her mouth, then closed it, clearly debating whether she should answer. Finally, she looked toward the photograph again and quietly said, "Daniel never told you about the center?" "The center?" She nodded. "Harbor Community Resources." I frowned. What exactly is Harbor Community Resources? The woman seemed shocked by the question. Actually shocked. Then she slowly looked around the office, at the staff photos, at the award plaques, at the programs hanging on the wall. And for the first time, I realized something strange. Every single photo included Daniel, fundraisers, events, community projects, holiday parties, years of them, hundreds of pictures, all with Daniel, all connected to this place, an entire part of his life, a part I knew absolutely nothing about. The woman swallowed hard, then said something that made my stomach drop. "Daniel helped build this place." I stared at her. "What do you mean?" "He founded it." My mind went blank. Founded it? Daniel already owned businesses. I knew every company he owned, or at least I thought I did. Yet apparently, my husband had founded an entire organization without ever mentioning it. Then the woman said something even worse. "Most people here think you're dead." The room spun. "What?" Her face immediately filled with regret, like she'd said too much, way too much, but it was already out. I stared at her, unable to breathe, because suddenly one terrifying question appeared in my mind. If these people thought I was dead, then who had Daniel told them was standing beside him in that family photograph? For a moment, I honestly thought I'd misheard her. Dead. The word echoed inside my head. Dead, not divorced, not separated, not estranged, dead. I stared at the woman. What exactly did Daniel tell people? She looked horrified, as if she desperately wished she could take the conversation back. But it was too late. The truth was already leaking out, slowly, messily, and there was no putting it back. The woman sat down across from me. "My name is Linda." I nodded, not because I cared, because I needed answers. Fast. Linda folded her hands together, nervously. "Years ago, Daniel told everyone his wife passed away from cancer." My stomach dropped. The room suddenly felt smaller, hotter, harder to breathe in. I actually laughed, not because it was funny, because it was impossible. I was standing right there, very much alive, very much not dead, and somehow dozens of people apparently believed otherwise. I looked around the office again, at the photos, at the awards, at the smiling faces, an entire community built around a lie involving me, a lie I never even knew existed. Why would he tell people that? Linda slowly shook her head. "I don't know." The answer felt genuine, which somehow made it worse, because if she didn't know, then who did? I stood up and walked toward the wall of photographs. Now I noticed things I'd missed before: messages, cards, thank you letters, memorial donations. One framed certificate caught my attention, dedicated in memory of Hannah Reed. My heart stopped. For a second I couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't process what I was seeing. My name, my actual name, mounted inside a frame, like I was gone, like I had died. I turned around, slowly. Linda's face told me everything. She knew exactly what I was looking at. "Oh, God." She covered her mouth. The office became completely silent, because there was no explaining this away. None. Then another voice spoke from the doorway, a woman's voice, soft, confused. "What's going on?" I turned. and immediately recognized her. The woman from the family photograph, the woman standing beside Daniel, the woman everyone would naturally assume was his wife. She looked around 35, brown hair, blue sweater, kind eyes, the kind of person who looked genuinely worried when someone else was upset. Her gaze moved from me to Linda, to the memorial certificate still hanging on the wall. Then her eyes widened, because suddenly she understood something, not everything, but enough. The woman looked directly at me, then quietly asked, "You're Hannah." The exact same question Linda had asked, only this time it sounded different. This time it sounded like she'd just seen a ghost. I nodded. The woman's face lost all color. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then tears suddenly filled her eyes. Real tears, not dramatic, not fake. Shock. Pure shock, and then she whispered 5 words that changed everything. "Daniel told me you died." The room went completely silent, because judging by the look on her face, she believed it, every word, for 5 years, and suddenly I realized something terrifying. This woman wasn't Daniel's secret wife. She wasn't the other woman. She was another victim. And whatever Daniel had been hiding, it was far bigger than an affair. The room stayed silent for several seconds. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The woman from the photograph stared at me like her entire world had just shifted sideways, because maybe it had. Finally, she sat down, slowly, like her legs no longer trusted the floor. "My name is Rachel." I nodded, still trying to understand what was happening. Rachel wiped at her eyes, then looked directly at me. "I never met Daniel through a relationship?" That sentence surprised me, because until now, I had been preparing myself for an affair, a second family, a secret marriage, something. Rachel shook her head. "He told me Harbor Community Resources was created after losing his wife." I felt sick, not angry, not yet, just sick. Because this wasn't a quick lie. This wasn't something Daniel said once. This was a story, a carefully built story, one he'd apparently been telling for years. Rachel pointed toward the photographs. "Most of the funding came after people heard what happened to you." The words landed like a punch. "What do you mean?" Rachel swallowed hard, then looked away. "People donated because of your story." My story, the story of a woman who wasn't dead, the story of a woman sitting right there. The room suddenly felt impossible. I stared at the wall, the photos, the certificates, the memorial displays, everything built around a version of my life that never happened. Then Rachel said something that made my blood run cold. "There were scholarship funds." I looked at her. "There were annual events." Another pause. "There were memorial donations made in your name." I closed my eyes, because suddenly I understood. This wasn't about another woman. This wasn't about another family. This wasn't about romance at all. It was about sympathy, about attention, about a story that made people open their wallets. And somehow Daniel had placed me at the center of it, without my knowledge, without my permission, without my consent. My phone vibrated. Daniel. His name appeared on the screen. The first call, then another, then another. 3 calls in less than 2 minutes. I didn't answer. Not yet. Rachel looked terrified now. "What are you going to do?" I honestly didn't know, because until that afternoon I thought I knew my husband. Now I wasn't sure I knew anything. Then Linda quietly spoke. "There's something else." The room immediately became still again, because those are never good words. Never. I looked at her. "What else?" Linda stood up, walked to a filing cabinet, unlocked a drawer, and removed a thick folder, much thicker than the envelope I'd opened earlier. My stomach tightened, because suddenly I knew this wasn't the end, not even close. Linda carried the folder over and placed it in front of me. Across the tab, someone had written, "Founding Documents." I opened it and immediately froze, because the first page wasn't signed by Daniel. It wasn't signed by Rachel. It wasn't signed by Harbor Community Resources. It was signed by me. Or at least someone had tried very hard to make it look that way. And for the second time that day, I found myself staring at my own name attached to something I had never agreed to. something that never should have existed. And suddenly I realized Daniel wasn't just hiding a lie. He might have built an entire organization on top of one. I stared at the signature, my name, my handwriting, or at least something that looked enough like it to fool a stranger. The problem was simple. I had never signed it. Not once, not ever. The room felt strangely quiet, like everyone was waiting for me to say something. I couldn't, not immediately. Because the document sitting in front of me changed everything. Until now I thought Daniel had told a lie. A terrible lie. A cruel lie, but still a lie. This was different. Documents are different. Documents leave fingerprints, paper trails, dates, witnesses, people. I turned the page, then another, then another. Every page made my stomach sink lower. Founding paperwork, authorization forms, donation approvals, partnership agreements, and somehow my name appeared over and over, like a ghost, like a person who had supposedly approved everything. Rachel sat across from me looking sick. Linda looked ashamed. Nobody interrupted. Then I found the date, the very first filing. 5 years ago, I immediately recognized it, because 5 years ago I was recovering from surgery. An emergency appendectomy. I spent almost a week in the hospital, another 2 weeks at home. I barely answered emails. I definitely wasn't signing nonprofit paperwork in a waterfront office. I pointed to the document. This date is impossible. Linda nodded slowly. I know. The certainty in her voice made me stop. You know? She looked down. For several seconds she didn't answer. Then she finally spoke, and what she said made my pulse jump. That's why I called Harold. The retired accountant, the man who handed me the envelope. I stared at her, because suddenly pieces started moving, not fitting together. Moving. Linda folded her hands, nervously. I discovered it 3 months ago. 3 months. She had known for 3 months. I felt anger rising, not because she found it, because she waited. She looked like she already knew what I was thinking. I was scared. That answer sounded painfully honest, too honest to be fake. I confronted Daniel. The room immediately became still. Rachel looked up. I leaned forward. What happened? Linda laughed once, a sad laugh, the kind people make when they're disappointed by someone they trusted. He told me to stay out of it. I wasn't surprised, not even a little. Rachel wasn't surprised either. That bothered me, because it meant she'd heard things like that before. Then Linda said something that made my stomach drop. He wasn't worried about the paperwork. I frowned. What was he worried about? She looked directly at me. You. The word landed hard, because suddenly I understood. Daniel wasn't afraid someone would discover forged signatures. He wasn't afraid someone would discover missing documents. He was afraid I would discover them. I sat back in my chair, trying to process everything. Then Rachel quietly pushed another folder toward me. Smaller, thinner, different color. There's something else. Those words again. Every time someone said them, my day got worse. I opened the folder. Inside were photographs, event photographs, fundraisers, award ceremonies, community dinners, years of them. At first they seemed ordinary. Then I noticed something strange. Every major event included a speech. Every speech included a story. And every story included me. My courage, my memory, my supposed battle with cancer, my supposed death, my supposed legacy. I flipped through image after image, each one making me sicker. People crying during memorial speeches, people holding candles, people donating money, people honoring a woman who wasn't dead, a woman sitting in that room. Me. Rachel looked miserable. I thought he was honoring you. The sadness in her voice felt real, which somehow hurt more, because she hadn't been helping Daniel deceive people. She'd been deceived too, for 5 years. Then my phone rang again. Daniel, call number 7. I stared at the screen. This time I answered. Neither of us spoke for a second. Then Daniel's voice came through. Calm, too calm. Hannah. Not Hannah. My name wasn't Hannah. For a moment, neither of us noticed. Then Daniel corrected himself. Quickly. Claire. The room went silent, because somehow for one brief second, my husband had called me by someone else's name, and suddenly I realized there might be another secret hiding behind all the others. The room went completely silent, not because Daniel corrected himself, because of the name he used before he corrected it. Hannah. For a second, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Rachel looked confused. Linda looked alarmed, and I just sat there holding the phone. Listening, Daniel quickly recovered, too quickly. Claire, listen to me. I ignored the correction. Who is Hannah? The line went dead silent. No explanation, no denial, just silence. The dangerous kind. The kind that tells you you've accidentally found the right question. I stood up, slowly. Every instinct I had was suddenly awake. Daniel. Nothing. Then finally, it doesn't matter. I actually laughed, not because it was funny, because it was ridiculous. A dead wife who wasn't dead, forged documents, a fake charity origin story, and now another woman's name. It matters. My voice stayed calm, much calmer than I felt. The silence stretched, then Daniel sighed. A long, exhausted sigh, the sound of a man realizing he was losing control of the story. Can we talk privately? No. Immediate answer, because whatever was happening, and it wasn't private anymore. Not after 5 years, not after hundreds of people had been dragged into it, not after my name had been used like a fundraising campaign. I put the phone on speaker. Daniel immediately noticed. Claire. Too late. Everyone could hear him now. Rachel sat frozen. Linda looked like she wanted to disappear, and I asked the question again. Who is Hannah? For several seconds, all I heard was breathing. Then Daniel quietly answered. My sister. The room went still. Rachel blinked. Linda frowned. I felt confusion replace anger. Sister. Daniel was an only child. At least that's what he'd always told me. Everyone knew that, or thought they did. You're an only child. Another pause, then, no. The answer landed hard, because it was so simple, so certain, and apparently completely true. I sat back down, trying to process it. Daniel continued speaking. His voice sounded different now, smaller somehow, less confident. I had an older sister. I stared at the phone. Had? The answer came quietly. She died when I was 16. Nobody spoke. The room seemed to shrink around us. Daniel continued. Hannah Reed. The name again, this time with sadness attached to it. Not panic, not fear, sadness. And suddenly something shifted, because for the first time all day, Daniel sounded honest, painfully honest. I never talk about her. Rachel looked stunned. Linda looked equally shocked. Clearly neither of them knew. I certainly didn't. We had been married 16 years. 16. And somehow I had never heard about a sister. Not once. Then Daniel said something that made my stomach drop. The center was supposed to be for her. I closed my eyes, because suddenly another piece moved into place. Not fitting, not yet, but moving. The center? It was her dream. His voice cracked, the first crack I'd heard all day. Helping families, helping kids, community outreach. Rachel slowly sat down, because she was hearing this for the first time too. Daniel continued. When she died, I couldn't let it go. I stared at the phone, trying to understand where this was leading, because grief explains a lot, but it doesn't explain forged signatures. It doesn't explain fake deaths. It doesn't explain pretending your wife is dead. Then Daniel said something that changed everything. None of it was supposed to start with a lie. The room froze, because that's exactly what guilty people say. None of it was supposed to start this way. I leaned forward. Then how did it start? The silence returned. Longer this time. Heavier. Then finally Daniel answered. And the answer made every person in that room go pale. Because Hannah wasn't my sister. My heart stopped. Rachel covered her mouth. Linda looked horrified. And suddenly, for the second time that day, I realized I didn't know who my husband really was. The room went completely silent. Nobody moved, nobody breathed, nobody spoke, because the sentence we had just heard made absolutely no sense. Hannah wasn't my sister. I stared at the phone, certain I had misunderstood him, certain there had to be another explanation, but there wasn't. Daniel sounded exhausted, like a man who had spent years carrying something too heavy. Finally, I asked the only question left. Then who was she? The answer came quietly. The woman I loved. Rachel covered her mouth. Linda sat down hard in her chair, and I simply closed my eyes, because suddenly everything changed. Again, 16 years of marriage, and somehow I had never heard her name, not once. Daniel took a shaky breath. Hannah and I were together when we were young. The room remained silent. We planned a future. Another pause. We planned everything. Then his voice cracked, the way voices crack when grief never really leaves. She died in a car accident 3 weeks before our wedding. Nobody interrupted. Nobody wanted to, because for the first time all day, the truth sounded real, painfully real. Daniel continued. After she died, I couldn't let her go. I stared at the floor, listening, trying to separate grief from deception, trying to understand how one became the other. The center was supposed to honor her. He laughed once, a sad laugh. The first donation event was for her memory? That part almost made sense, almost. Then came the part that didn't. The donations were small. I frowned. Daniel continued. Then one fundraiser used a different story. My stomach tightened, because I already knew where this was going. A story sells, a tragedy sells. People respond to stories. Daniel's voice dropped lower. More money came in. Rachel's face turned pale. The room felt colder. The next year they wanted another event. Another pause, another mistake, another lie. And slowly, one lie became 10. 10 became 100. 100 became an entire organization, built on sympathy, built on emotion, built on stories. Then came the worst part, the part Daniel clearly hated saying. The story stopped being about Hannah. Nobody spoke, because we already knew. It became about me, the dead wife, the fake cancer, the fake legacy, the fake memorial. Daniel finally said the thing he should have said years ago. I should have stopped it. Simple, honest, true, for once. Rachel looked devastated. Linda looked ashamed, and I felt something unexpected. Not forgiveness, not anger, just clarity. Because none of this happened in one day. It happened one choice at a time, one lie at a time, one excuse at a time. Until nobody remembered where the truth ended and the story began. The investigations lasted months. Auditors reviewed everything. Lawyers reviewed everything. Financial records, donation records, founding records, every document, every signature, every claim. The organization survived. Most of the money had actually gone where donors intended. Families were helped. Programs existed. Children benefited. The mission itself was real. The story behind it wasn't. Daniel stepped down, immediately, publicly, without a fight. The board released corrections, donors were informed, records were updated, the memorial displays disappeared. My name disappeared from every brochure, every plaque, every speech, exactly where it should have been. 6 months later, I stood outside Harbor Community Resources one last time. The sign was still there. The building was still there. The people were still helping families. Only now they were doing it honestly. Rachel became executive director. Linda stayed with the organization. And Daniel, for the first time in decades, started telling the truth. Not because a lawyer forced him, not because a court forced him, because eventually there was nothing left to hide behind. The funny thing about secrets is that they feel safe while you're carrying them, until one day they become heavier than the truth. I looked at the building one last time, then got into my car and drove away. Not angry, not victorious, just free. Because sometimes closure doesn't come from winning. Sometimes it comes from finally understanding the story you were trapped inside and deciding you don't have to live there anymore.